You think you're living in the present. You're not. Right now, today, in the life you're actively trying to build, you are being governed by something that happened years ago. Maybe decades. Something you've told yourself you've moved past. Something you've convinced yourself no longer has a hold on you. And the most unsettling part of what I'm about to tell you is this: the fact that you believe you've moved past it is often the clearest sign that you haven't. Because here is how the past works. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't tap you on the shoulder and say, "I'm still here. I'm still running things." It is far more sophisticated than that. It hides itself inside your instincts, inside your reactions, inside the choices you make and, more importantly, the choices you refuse to make. Inside the walls you've built around yourself that feel like wisdom but function like a prison. Inside the patterns you keep returning to no matter how many times you swear you're done with them. The past is not behind you. It is inside you. And until you understand exactly how it got in there, exactly what mechanism it's using to stay, you cannot begin to dismantle it. You can want to be free. You can try to be free. You can read about being free and listen to people talk about being free and tell other people how much you've healed. And still, at 3 in the morning, when nobody is watching, the past will surface. And it will feel as real and as raw as the day it happened. Today is not about how to break free. Today is about something that has to come first. Today is about seeing the prison clearly. Understanding its architecture. Knowing every lock, every hinge, every mechanism by which yesterday continues to direct today. Because you cannot escape a trap you refuse to examine. And most people, most of their lives, refuse to examine it. Machiavelli, a man who spent years in exile, who was imprisoned and tortured, who watched everything he built be stripped away, wrote one of the most important observations in the history of human psychology. He said that the great weakness of most people is not lack of intelligence or lack of desire. It is a preference for comfortable illusions over uncomfortable truths. And nowhere is that preference more expensive than in the story we tell ourselves about our relationship to our own past. You are about to hear some uncomfortable truths. About how the past controls you. About why it has been so effective. About the 4 specific mechanisms it uses, mechanisms that are operating in your life right now, whether you know it or not. About why the things you've been doing to try to get past your past have largely not worked, and why they can't work, given how the underlying system actually functions. This is not comfortable content. But it is the content that everything else, every act of healing, every step of genuine transformation, depends on. You have to see the prison before you can walk out of it. Let's look at it together. All of it. Without flinching. Drop this in the comments: I am ready to see what has been holding me. Part 1: What the past actually puts on you. Most people talk about the past as if it's a single thing. A single wound, a single memory, a single burden. But the past is not singular. It is layered. It comes at you from multiple directions simultaneously. And each layer has a different mechanism, a different texture, a different way of embedding itself into your present. To understand why the past controls you, you first have to understand what it is specifically putting on you. The first weight is regret. Regret is the past's most direct instrument. It is the specific, focused pain of what you did or failed to do. The decision that went wrong. The chance you didn't take. The moment when you could have been your best self and you weren't. Regret keeps you anchored to a specific point in time, a point that you return to repeatedly, running the alternatives, wondering what would have happened differently. It is the mind's attempt to solve the unsolvable. To change the unchangeable through the sheer force of sustained attention. And it fails. Every time. But that doesn't stop the attempt. The second weight is shame. Shame is deeper than regret and more dangerous. Regret says, I did something wrong. Shame says, I am something wrong. It's not about a behavior or a choice, it's a verdict about your fundamental worth. About whether you are the kind of person who deserves the good things you want. Shame lives in the body. It lives in the instinctive flinch when someone compliments you. In the way you automatically disqualify yourself from opportunities before anyone else can. In the belief, buried so deep it rarely surfaces as a conscious thought, that the bad things that happened to you or because of you were somehow appropriate. That you deserved them. The third weight is resentment. Resentment is the past's way of keeping your attention on someone else. On what they did. On what they took from you. On the injustice of it, and the justice, perhaps, that never came. Resentment is the most seductive of the four weights because it is so frequently warranted. The harm was real. The injustice was real. And holding resentment feels, in some deep part of us, like refusal to let the person who harmed us off the hook. Like a final act of accountability when no other accountability was possible. The fourth weight is the most invisible. It is identity. The way your past has shaped not just your memory of specific events but your entire operating model of who you are, what you're capable of, what you deserve, how other people will treat you, what is and isn't possible for someone like you. This weight is so embedded that most people never recognize it as a weight at all. They simply experience it as reality. As how things are. As to who I am. They don't know it's the past speaking. They think it's just the truth. Men judge generally more by appearances than by reality. And the danger is when a man has been told so many times who he is by his circumstances that he begins to tell himself. These four weights, regret, shame, resentment, and false identity, are not abstract psychological concepts. They are operational forces in your daily life. They are the actual mechanism by which the past reaches into your present and shapes your choices, your relationships, your risks, your limits, your voice, your silence. Most people are aware of one, maybe two of these at most. Most have never clearly named all four or understood how each one works. And that lack of clarity is part of what makes them so effective. They operate best in the dark. In the unnamed. In the space between what you're consciously thinking and what is actually driving your behavior. In the sections that follow, we are going to illuminate each one. Not to wallow in it. Not to perform suffering. But because seeing clearly is the non-negotiable first step toward moving freely. You cannot put down a weight you haven't acknowledged you're carrying. So let's start carrying this conversation forward. With the lights on. Drop this in the comments, I see the four weights. I name them all. Part 2, How the Past Keeps Replicating Itself. Here is the thing about the past that most people never understand. Most people think the past is just a memory. Just a record of what happened, stored somewhere in the mind, occasionally surfacing, occasionally causing pain, but essentially passive. Essentially inert. It isn't. The past is not passive. It is actively productive. It produces your present. Over and over. In a loop so consistent, so predictable, so perfectly self-reinforcing that most people mistake it for their personality, their destiny, their nature. The loop works like this. Something painful happens in your past. Your mind, doing exactly what minds are designed to do, processes that event and generates a meaning. A conclusion about what happened and what it implies. This meaning becomes embedded in your self-concept, your working model of who you are and how the world works. That self-concept then shapes your behavior, the choices you make, the risks you take or don't take, the relationships you enter and exit, the way you show up in challenging moments. And that behavior produces outcomes that, in most cases, confirm the original meaning. which deepens the self-concept, which further shapes the behavior, which produces more confirming outcomes. The loop closes. It becomes self-contained, self-perpetuating. It doesn't need new input from the past to keep running, it generates its own fuel from the present. The past, through this loop, continues to produce itself in your future, indefinitely, until the loop is consciously broken. Let me make this concrete. Someone experiences a significant rejection early in life. Maybe a parent who was emotionally unavailable. Maybe a social humiliation that left a deep mark. The mind assigns a meaning, I am not someone people want to stay close to. That meaning embeds itself in the identity layer. The person begins, unconsciously, to behave in ways consistent with that belief, preemptively withdrawing before they can be rejected, choosing emotional unavailability as a protection strategy, sabotaging intimacy before it reaches a depth where loss would truly hurt. The behavior produces predictable outcomes, relationships stay superficial, people sense the walls and pull back, the person ends up alone in the ways that matter. And the mind points at this outcome and says, see? I told you. I'm not someone people stay close to. The meaning is confirmed. The loop runs another cycle. The event that started this loop may have been 30 years ago. The person may not consciously connect their current loneliness to that original rejection. They may not even remember the original event with clarity. But the loop is running. Every day. Producing the outcome the past programmed. The wise man does what the wise man must, but the fool repeats the same action expecting different results, not knowing his hand is guided by something he cannot see and has never examined. This is why surface-level change so rarely produces lasting transformation. Why New Year's resolutions collapse. Why you can know intellectually that you're being self-destructive and do it anyway. Why you can watch yourself repeating patterns that you genuinely don't want to repeat, and feel almost powerless to stop. Because the pattern isn't driven by your conscious decision-making. It's driven by the loop. By the operating system the past built in you. And your conscious decisions are running on top of that operating system, which means the operating system always wins when there's a conflict. Think about your patterns. The relationship dynamics you keep recreating. The career ceilings you keep hitting. The financial behaviors that keep producing the same outcomes. The way you respond to conflict or criticism or success. The thing you always do in a certain type of situation. The thing you never do, no matter how much you say you want to. Look at the pattern. Now ask, when did this begin? Not necessarily the very first instance, you may not remember that, but what is the earliest version of this pattern you can locate? What is the experience that the pattern seems to be organized around? What meaning did that experience generate about you, about people, about what's safe, about what's possible? Because that meaning, that old, embedded, unexamined conclusion, is the engine of the loop. And the loop cannot be broken by willpower or positive thinking or discipline. It can only be broken by locating the meaning, examining it honestly, and making a deliberate decision about whether to keep running it. That is the work. And it begins with seeing the loop clearly enough to step outside of it, even for a moment, and ask, is this actually true? Is this meaning I assigned to this event still serving me? Did it ever? And if not, who decides what it means now? Drop this in the comments, I see the loop. I am not the loop. Part 3, Why your mind keeps the past alive. To truly understand why the past has such staying power, we need to talk about something that most people in conversations like this one skip over entirely. The actual biological mechanism by which the past gets encoded, stored, and retrieved in a way that gives it disproportionate influence over your present. Because here is something that will reframe the entire way you think about your relationship to your past. The brain you are using right now, the brain doing your thinking, making your decisions, interpreting your experiences, is not a neutral observer of your life. It is a system shaped by millions of years of evolution to prioritize one thing above all others: survival. And survival, for most of human history, meant being extremely attentive to threats, remembering them precisely, being ready to respond to them instantly. Your brain's entire architecture is biased toward the negative, toward the threatening, toward the painful. This is called the negativity bias, and it is one of the most thoroughly documented phenomena in psychological research. Negative experiences are encoded more deeply than positive ones. They are recalled more vividly, more frequently, and with more emotional intensity. They are flagged by the brain as important, for something to remain vigilant about, to watch for signs of repetition, to build response strategies around. This means that the painful events of your past, the failures, the losses, the humiliations, the betrayals, are neurologically privileged. They are not stored the same way a neutral event is stored. They are stored with heightened emotional charge, with multiple sensory associations, with links to the body's stress response system, so that when something in the present environment resembles the past event, the emotional and physiological response can be triggered before your conscious mind has even had time to process what's happening. This is why you can be having a completely normal interaction with a completely safe person and suddenly feel a spike of anxiety or defensiveness or the urge to pull away that seems wildly disproportionate to what's actually happening. Your amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, has identified a pattern that resembles a past threat and has fired off a response before your frontal cortex could run a rational assessment of the situation. The past is not just in your memory. It is in your nervous system. It is in your body. Men are not masters of their first movements, only of their second. The body's first response belongs to what was. The man of power learns to govern the second, and in doing so, reclaims the present from the past. This is why you cannot simply decide your way out of the past's influence. The biological machinery runs faster than the decision-making machinery. The threat response, the flash of shame, the spike of anxiety, the impulse to withdraw or attack or freeze, happens before you consciously choose. And if you don't understand this, you do what most people do. You judge yourself for the reaction. You add shame about the shame. You become angry about the anxiety. You feel weak for feeling what you feel. And that self-judgment adds another layer to the burden without addressing the underlying mechanism. Understanding the neuroscience does not mean surrendering to it. It means understanding what you're actually working with. It means recognizing that the emotional reactions that seem to come from nowhere, the patterns that seem to resist your best efforts to change them, the ways your body responds before your mind can intervene, these are not character flaws. They are the completely predictable outputs of a brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. Protecting you from what hurt you before. The brain keeps the past alive because keeping the past alive kept your ancestors alive. And your brain doesn't know you're not in that threat environment anymore. It doesn't update automatically. It doesn't distinguish between a social humiliation and a physical danger. It treats all stored threats as potentially relevant until it is specifically, deliberately, repeatedly taught otherwise. The word there is taught. The brain is learnable. Neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to reorganize itself, to build new pathways, to rewire its responses, is real. The patterns the past built in you can be unbuilt. Not instantly. Not through a single moment of clarity. But through consistent, deliberate, repeated practice of new responses. The brain can learn new patterns just as effectively as it learned the old ones. The difference is that the old patterns were built by intense, emotionally charged experience, and the new patterns must be built by sustained, intentional effort. That effort is what video 2 of this series is about. But you cannot begin that effort without understanding what you're actually working against. You're not working against your past. You're working against the neural architecture your past built inside you. That is a more precise target. And a more precise target means a more effective approach. Drop this in the comments: my past is in my body. And I can teach my body something new. Part for the how narrative becomes identity. Let's move from neuroscience to something perhaps even more fundamental to the human experience: story. Because as much as the past is encoded in your nervous system, it is also encoded in your narrative. In the stories you tell about yourself. And these stories may be the single most powerful mechanism by which the past maintains its control over your present. Human beings are narrative creatures. We do not experience our lives as a raw sequence of events. We experience them as stories, with characters, with causes, with meanings, with arcs. We are constantly, automatically, unconsciously turning our experience into narrative. And that narrative shapes everything. It shapes what we notice and what we ignore. It shapes what we believe is possible for us and what we've already decided is not. It shapes who we think we are and therefore how we behave and therefore what outcomes we produce. Your story about your past is not just a record. It is an instruction. It tells you, in every new situation, how someone like you, someone with your history, your failures, your background, your wounds, should respond. What someone like you can reasonably expect. What someone like you should or shouldn't try. The story is the operating manual the past gave you. And most people are running that manual without ever having consciously read it. Think about the story you tell about your past. Not the polished version you share at dinner parties, the real internal version. The story you tell yourself at 3 in the morning. The narrative that organizes your understanding of how you got here and what that means about where you can go. What is the genre of that story? Is it a tragedy? A story of a person who had something and lost it? A story of a person who never quite got what they deserved? A story of a person defined by a particular chapter that overshadows everything else? And who is the protagonist? Not in the sense of who the story is about, obviously it's about you. But in the sense of what kind of protagonist you are. Are you an active protagonist, someone who makes choices, who acts on the world, who shapes outcomes? Or are you a passive protagonist, someone to whom things happen, who responds to forces larger than themselves, who moves through the story being acted upon rather than acting? The answer matters enormously. Because a passive protagonist in a life story is someone who has given the past authorial control over the narrative. Someone whose story says, the things that happened to me made me who I am. Implying that the things that happened are in the driver's seat. That the past is writing the present. That the future is an extension of what was rather than a creation of what's chosen. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. And the most dangerous case is when you appear to yourself to be only what your past has made you, and you forget that you are also, always, what you choose. The stories we tell about our past are not innocent recollections. They are active constructions that we update and reinforce constantly. Every time you tell someone the story of your hardest chapter, you are not just remembering it, you are rehearsing it. Strengthening the neural pathways associated with it. Embedding it more deeply into your identity. And with every rehearsal, the story becomes more true, not because the events become more real, but because the interpretation of those events becomes more automatic, more reflexive, more assumed. There is a specific way this shows up in language that I want you to start noticing. Listen for sentences that begin with "I'm the kind of person who," or "I've always been someone who," or "I just don't," or "I could never." These are the verbal fingerprints of a past-derived identity. They are places where the story has calcified into fact. where an interpretation that was made in a specific moment under specific circumstances has been generalized into a permanent characteristic, into something that is just true about you, regardless of evidence to the contrary, regardless of growth that has already happened, regardless of the person you actually are right now. Every single one of those sentences is the past speaking. Every single one of them is the narrative choosing your future before you get a vote. And the first step toward reclaiming that vote is simply hearing them, noticing them, recognizing them for what they are, not facts about you, but stories about who you used to be, told in the present tense. In the next video, we will talk about how to rewrite these stories. How to update the narrative in a way that is honest but forward-facing. How to be the author of the story rather than the subject of it. But here, now, the practice is simpler. It is simply to listen to your inner monologue, to the way you describe yourself to others, to the stories you return to most often, to the genre and the protagonist type of the life narrative you are living inside. Because you cannot rewrite a story you have not yet clearly read. Drop this in the comments: I hear the story I have been telling. And I know it is not the only story. Part 5: Why you keep choosing your past. Here is the part that is hardest to hear. Because everything we've covered so far has positioned the past as something that was done to you. The painful events, the neural encoding, the self-reinforcing loop, the narrative that embedded itself without your conscious consent. All of that is real. And none of it is your fault. But there is another layer to this. One that requires a kind of honesty that most people work very hard to avoid. And it is this: at some point, for most of us, at many points, we stop being unwilling prisoners of the past. We start choosing it. Not consciously. Not deliberately. But functionally. We choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar freedom. We choose the cage we know over the open door we don't. Why? Why would anyone choose their own limitation? Why would anyone actively maintain the thing that is holding them back? Because the cage serves a function. And until you understand what function it serves, you cannot honestly examine whether you want to keep paying for that function, or whether you are ready, finally, to find a better way to meet the same need. The past, the story, the wounds, the identity built around what happened, offers several things that are genuinely valuable in the short term. The first is an explanation. A coherent account of why your life is the way it is that doesn't require you to take full responsibility for changing it. The past explains the gap between who you want to be and who you are. It explains why certain things haven't worked out. It provides context for limitations that might otherwise be harder to account for. It says, this is why. And a this is why is extraordinarily comforting, even when the why is painful. The second thing the past offers is protection. If you've been hurt in a particular way, if a specific kind of vulnerability led to a specific kind of loss, then the past, encoded as identity, keeps you away from that vulnerability. I don't do relationships like that anymore. Is the past protecting you from being hurt the same way again? I don't take risks like that. Is the past keeping you away from the precipice where you fell before? The limitation is real. But so is the protection the limitation offers. And if the protection has felt necessary, if the original wound was significant enough, it can be almost impossible to voluntarily remove the protection, even when it has long since stopped being proportionate to the actual threat. A prince who is not wise himself cannot be well advised. So it is with a man's past. If he does not examine it with clear eyes, his choices will always be advised by what he fears rather than by what is true. The third thing the past offers, and this is the one people most rarely name, is identity. A sense of who you are. Even if it is a painful or limited identity, it is a known one. It is yours. And the strange truth is that we are often more afraid of losing a painful identity than of keeping it. because losing it means becoming someone unfamiliar. Someone without the defining story. Someone who has to meet the world fresh, without the armor of "this is what happened to me and this is why I am the way I am." Without the past as identity anchor, there is a kind of vertigo. A free-floating uncertainty about who you are without the story. And that uncertainty, even in the direction of freedom and growth, is deeply uncomfortable. The mind will often choose the known discomfort of the familiar cage over the unknown discomfort of genuine transformation. Machiavelli observed this in political contexts with devastating clarity. People will complain endlessly about the conditions they live under and simultaneously resist any genuine change to those conditions, because at least the current conditions are known. At least they know how to navigate the current reality, however painful. The new reality, even a better one, is a territory without maps. I am not telling you this to shame you for choosing your past. I am telling you this because genuine freedom requires an honest accounting of the deal you have been making. You have been getting something from your relationship to the past: explanation, protection, identity, and it has been costing you something in return: your present freedom, your future possibilities, your genuine engagement with your own life. That is a real transaction. And only you can decide whether the terms are still acceptable. Most people, when they see the transaction clearly, when they actually add up what the past is costing them in the currency of unlived life, find that the deal has been terrible for a very long time. That they have been overpaying for protection they no longer need. That the explanation, however comforting, has been more expensive than the uncertainty it was protecting them from. That the identity, however familiar, has been smaller and colder and more limiting than the one that is actually available to them. You have to see the cage clearly before you can choose whether to walk out of it. And you have to understand that the door is, and in many cases has been for some time, open. You are not being held by force. You are being held by habit, by comfort, by the deeply human preference for the known over the unknown, even when the known is a prison. The question, the only relevant question, is whether you're ready to make a different choice. Drop this in the comments: I see the cage. And I see that I have had the key all along. Part 6, Seeing Yourself as You Are. We arrive, at last, at the diagnostic conclusion. The piece that ties everything together into a clear, honest, actionable understanding of where you actually are in relation to your past. Machiavelli, in all of his brutally honest writing about human nature, power, and the gap between how things appear and how they actually are, returned again and again to one foundational principle. The principle that precedes all effective action. That makes possible all genuine change. The principle of seeing things as they are. Not as you want them to be. Not as you fear they might be. Not as they once were. Not as someone told you they were. As they actually, presently, really are. With clear eyes and no flinching and no preferred conclusion dictating what you're allowed to find. He called this virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but a kind of disciplined, unsentimental engagement with reality. The capacity to look at what is actually in front of you, including what is actually inside you, and to see it clearly enough to respond to it effectively. And he believed that most people lacked this capacity. Not because they weren't intelligent, but because they were too invested in a particular version of reality to examine whether that version was actually true. The Machiavellian diagnosis, applied to your relationship with your past, looks like this. You sit down with yourself, not the edited, presentable version, but the real one, and you ask for questions. And you answer them with the pitiless honesty of someone who has finally decided that the truth, however uncomfortable, is less expensive than the illusion. First, what story am I telling about my past, and is it the only story available? Look at your narrative. Identify the central theme, the defining interpretation. And then ask honestly, is this the only way to read these events? Or is this the version I settled on in a moment of pain, and have been telling ever since, without ever revisiting? Second, what loop is currently running in my life? Where do I keep producing the same outcome despite different intentions? What pattern keeps reasserting itself regardless of my conscious efforts to change it? And what past meaning or belief is the engine of that loop? Knowing your own strength is not arrogance. It is necessity. And knowing your own weakness, your own hidden machinery, is not defeat. It is the beginning of all real power. Third, what am I getting from my relationship with the past? What does it explain for me? What does it protect me from? What identity does it give me? Answer this honestly. Without judgment. The past is serving you in some way. Identifying how is critical to understanding why it has been so difficult to release. Fourth, what is it costing me? Not abstractly. Specifically. What conversations am I not fully present in? What opportunities am I not pursuing? What version of myself am I not showing up as? What is the price, paid in the currency of your actual one life, of the deal you have been making with your past? These four questions are the diagnostic. They are not comfortable questions. They will not produce comfortable answers. But they will produce accurate ones. And accuracy, clarity, is the only foundation on which genuine change can be built. You cannot heal a wound you refuse to accurately diagnose. You cannot change a pattern you refuse to honestly name. You cannot walk out of a prison you refuse to acknowledge you are in. This video was about the diagnosis. About seeing clearly. About naming the mechanisms, the four weights, the loop, the neuroscience, the narrative, the comfortable cage, by which the past has been running your present without your fully conscious awareness or consent. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. It is the moment when you stop sleepwalking through a life that is being scripted by something that is over. And you pick up the pen. In the next video, we will talk about what you do with it. About the specific, practical, psychologically grounded work of not just understanding the past's hold on you, but breaking it. Completely. Permanently. Without going back. But you needed to see it first. And now you have. The diagnosis is complete. The operation starts next. Drop this in the comments. I see myself clearly. And what I see is someone who is ready to be free. Most people spend their entire lives living in a story written by their past without ever realizing that the story could be written differently. You just took the first step that most people never take. You looked at it honestly. That matters more than it might feel like it does right now. Because the moment you can see something clearly, really clearly, without flinching, without the protective blur of comfortable illusion, you have already begun to move it. Subscribe if this hit something real in you. Because video 2 of this series is where we do the actual work. The extraction. The burning. The rebuilding. Everything we just diagnosed, we are going to dismantle it, piece by piece, with tools that are rooted in the same ruthless clarity Machiavelli brought to understanding power. Drop your affirmation in the comments. Tell me which of the four weights is the heaviest for you right now. I read every one.